Welcome you all to the Plains Indians and Pioneers Museum. My name is Mikkel Robinson. I may be now somewhat of a familiar face, but I'm the executive director here, and we're pretty excited about this presentation, and we're happy that you're all here. I'm going to give it to Bob Ray. He's going to introduce our speaker today. So, Bob?
Don't panic, these are short notes. May have borrowed somebody's glasses. Well, as Mikkel said, welcome to the program featuring Mr. Dee Cordry. As she said, I'm Bob Ray, president of the Friends of Fort Supply, which is kind of a partnership organization with the museum here. This particular program is made possible in part by the grant from the Oklahoma Humanities Grant. And when you have an Oklahoma Humanities grant, you have to con somebody into being your, the word I'm thinking of, a scholar. Well, you had to dig deep to find one around here, so here I am. As an introduction, Mr. Cordry is a retired special agent with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. And he's been retired long enough that some of you in here don't need to worry about the statute of limitations or any outstanding warrants. He has written a book, an earlier book, about early lawmen in Oklahoma entitled, Alive if Possible, Dead if Necessary. It's Oklahoma after all. He is past president and editor of the Oklahoma Hombres, an association of the preservation of the history of lawmen and outlaws in early day Oklahoma. He has contributed publications to entities such as the Chronicles of Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Heritage Association, and Westerners International. His program today is related to his book, Children of White Thunder, Legacy of a Cheyenne Family, 1830 to 2020, which is a pretty ambitious title, but he's thorough. This book is a broad, sweeping biography of an extended Cheyenne family, originating with the gentleman, Mr. White Thunder, a Cheyenne Holy Man and keeper of the sacred arrows, sacred medicine arrows. And his descendants include people who have made history and contributed to saving the history and culture of the Cheyenne people, spanning nearly 2 centuries now. So please welcome Mr. Dee Cordry.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Dee Cordry, and by profession, like Bob was saying, I was in law enforcement. And I was fortunate to work with another agent who was also my boss most of the time, who's Cheyenne Arapaho. And over the years, he would tell me stories about his great-grandparents in the Old West. And the more I heard about, I got hooked. And I started doing some research kind of as a hobby, and eventually I decided, you know, I need to write a book about this. Well, that ended up taking a long time. But I met people along the way, like Bob, who had information related to some of these events and some of these people. And he graciously shared information with me. And so it's been very, very nice. And I completed this book and published it a couple of years ago, but I haven't stopped researching. I continue to find more and more interesting material. And so what I'm going to talk about right now is the Cheyenne Holy Man from the 1830s. And as the Holy Man, he was as high as you can go in the Cheyenne tribe without being a chief. The chiefs were not his boss, and he was not their boss, but they had to, they kind of had equal authority. Now, next slide, please. In one of my, in some of my research, I was very excited to find this in the files at the Oklahoma Historical Society, and it is original handwritten response to some questions. And it's written by George Bent, who was a grandson of White Thunder. And we'll go through this in the next slide, but he's answering questions here about his grandfather. Go ahead. And what he points out is that White Thunder was not the chief, he was the keeper of the great sacred medicine arrows. And so he was not a chief. He wanted to make that clear. He was looked upon, these are George's words, he was looked upon by Cheyenne tribe as Holy Man. And that he was killed in battle, killed by the Kiowa in battle in 1838. And he gives the location on Wolf Creek, 20 miles above Fort Supply. Now, this is pretty good information, but it's only one source. And we have other, you know, we still don't know the exact location, but this is what George, the grandson, is telling us. George was educated. His father was a white man that built Bent's Fort in Colorado, and his mother was full-blood Cheyenne. Next slide. So what are the great sacred medicine arrows? They are 4 arrows, physical arrows, that were originally provided by Maheo, and who is their supreme being, all Father, and he turned these over to Sweet Root, and they became the holy covenants of the Cheyenne tribe, and they possess power. And the keeper of the medicine arrows has to protect those arrows, and if they need to be repaired, that's his job. Requires, it was a huge responsibility for the arrow keeper. And you know, I'm having a hard time reading these. I'm going to step over here. This drawing was made based on first-hand information. And the arrow keeper would have these slashes made on him as a sacrifice. They're on the back, on the arms, on the chest, and this would have been done to White Thunder, and so this is what his body would have looked like. And also notice there on the chest. We're going to be coming back to that in a little while. That carving, that symbol that's on his chest. Now, after White Thunder is killed in 1838, there's an interim arrow keeper, and then Stone Forehead became the arrow keeper. And when he died, his son became the arrow keeper. And at that point in time, they weren't doing this anymore. So White Thunder may have been the last person, or maybe Stone Forehead, but not Stone Forehead's son. Next slide. Now, while White Thunder was the arrow keeper, the Cheyenne went to war, or specifically went into battle with their enemies, the Pawnee tribe, in 1830. Things didn't work out well. And before White Thunder could perform certain ceremonies with the power from the arrows that would have helped protect the Cheyenne warriors and given them certain advantages, the Pawnee had seen them, and the fight started before White Thunder could do those ceremonies. He had, as was traditional, had given this bundle with the 4 arrows to a Cheyenne warrior to ride into battle, and that's what he did. But a disaster happened, and a Pawnee warrior grabbed him and rode away. Well, things just fell apart. The Cheyenne warriors, their sacred arrows had been taken, and they retreated. The Pawnee retreated, and they had these 4 arrows. Next slide. Well, White Thunder, and I forgot to mention, you don't have to go back. So White Thunder and some arrow priests make 4 new arrows to replace the ones that had been stolen. And in around 1834 or 1835, White Thunder takes it upon himself that he's going to go to the Pawnee and ask for the arrows back. And so that's what he does. And he takes his wife with him, and another Cheyenne, and that man's wife, and a couple of other people, and they ride to near the Pawnee village, and then they walk the rest of the way unarmed into the Pawnee village. Now, with the women with them, and they're unarmed, that lessens any threat that the Pawnee warriors might have felt. And they are admitted to that village. And they walk in there, and they're taken to the Pawnee chief and taken into his lodge and treated as guests. And those arrows are right there. They're up in a special place on display. Now this presents a few problems, and maybe this story is not totally accurate, but women are not supposed to see those arrows. But we don't know what how the Pawnee handled that, because they're right there in plain view. Maybe Pawnee women were not allowed in, but here we are now. There's at least 2 women here. But anyway, White Thunder, showing a huge diplomacy, asks for the arrows to be returned and negotiates, and the Pawnee agrees to give back one arrow. And then there's a different version that says it was two. You're not giving back all of them. So one or two, and White Thunder is able to leave with that, or those two arrows. And just think, just imagine the courage that it took to walk into the enemy's village unarmed. And this whole episode just tells me, it makes me feel that this man was a diplomat, and he was courageous, and he was a leader. I think that's what this illustrates. Next slide. So, in 1837, one of the soldier societies of the Cheyenne, called the Bowstring Warriors, prepare to go from essentially Cheyenne Arapaho territory or country north of the Arkansas River down south towards this area, because this was Kiowa Comanche territory, so to speak. It's not a hard boundary, but these bowstring warriors decide they're going to go on a horse raid, a horse stealing expedition. And they travel across country down to somewhere in the Texas Panhandle. And this is going to be a location that we don't know the exact location. We may find out one of these days. But they go on this expedition. Now, they wanted White Thunder to perform a blessing ceremony and bestow the power of the arrows upon them, so that this would be a successful expedition. And White Thunder said, no, this is not the right time. The arrows have not been renewed, but they insisted. As a matter of fact, they whipped him. They beat this, and he was about 70 years old at the time, and he finally agreed to do it. But he told them that this was not going to be successful. So they traveled down into the Texas Panhandle, and they're going to go and steal horses from the Kiowa. And as they approach a Kiowa village to do that, they're discovered. And there's about 42 or 44, or some stories say 48 of these Cheyenne bowstring warriors. And the Kiowas discover them. And they rush out and they surround the bowstring warriors and kill all of them. And it's called the, one title is the Battle of Robe Entrenchments, and another is the Bowstring Disaster. Next slide. Well, Kiowas have been drawing history for a long time, and their artwork on hides and also on paper in ledger books is very, very important. And this illustration, I believe, represents that battle where they wipe out the bowstring warriors. And the bowstring warriors had built a breastworks to as a defense, the defensive breastworks. And the Kiowas surround them, and you see all of these arrows inbound. And they've overwhelmed and outnumbered the Cheyennes, and they kill all of them. Next slide. Here's another drawing. Similar. You see the breastworks. You see a drawing of some men on the inside, and you see all of these arrows inbound. But this one also includes this Kiowa warrior wearing a headdress. And it's just fascinating to me that we have access to these drawings that illustrate these events from about 200 years ago. Next slide. Well, a year later, the Cheyenne determined that they're going to go to war against the Kiowa Comanches. And they set out to set things straight over this bowstring disaster. And they contact their allies, the Arapahoes, and they travel down the Arkansas River and then turn south and go directly towards what is now the Oklahoma Panhandle and Beaver Creek. And they end up right over here, just west of Fort Supply, where there's the junction of Beaver Creek and Wolf Creek that forms what we call the North Canadian River. Well, remember, George Bent said that this battle happened 20 miles above that junction. Well, if you do it in a straight line, it takes you down here near Gage. But of course, this creek curves and all around, and so I don't know if he meant a straight line or exactly what. And there's differing opinions on where this happened. But it's on Wolf Creek, probably on this side of the Texas border. But anyway, next slide. One thing in favor of this location, but of course there's springs, or were springs, all along Wolf Creek. But right down here by Gage, these springs right here, these three springs, still produce a lot of water. This is the highway going north out of Gage, and this is 25 Mile Creek, and it runs into Wolf Creek just right down here. So all I'm saying is this is a likely location. And to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been a search or an archaeological field study. Maybe at some point in time, we'll find out. Next slide. So, the Cheyenne Arapahoes attack the Kiowa village. White Thunder, the arrow keeper, is there. Well, again, before he's able to perform the necessary ceremonies, some of the Cheyenne start attacking. And they have this fight. It's not clear who the winner was. Some Cheyennes died, quite a few Kiowa Comanches. There were 3 tribes there, the Kiowa, Comanches, and Apaches, who were allies. But during this fight, at the spot where White Thunder was, with some other chiefs, is overrun by Kiowas, and he's killed. White Thunder is killed in 1838 out here somewhere along Wolf Creek. And again, there's no, it's not written down that I have found yet. It may be written down somewhere. Well, what became of White Thunder, or his physical remains? He could have been buried in the ground, or he could have been placed on a scaffold up in a tree. Don't know. Next slide. Here's an example of something that has been written about the combat, about that fighting. And this gives us quite an idea of what it was when we say there was a battle between differing tribes, and it was hand-to-hand combat. They were on horseback, some of them were afoot. They would be armed with a lance and bows. One of the Cheyennes was Old Little Wolf, and he and another prominent Cheyenne, Medicine Water, had led a charge against a part of that Kiowa village. And it specifically mentions that Medicine Water had been in the forefront during these actions. And at one point, Medicine Water is on horseback, and there's a Kiowa warrior named Sleeping Bear who's getting ready to shoot him with an arrow. Medicine Water has on a shirt that was called Iron Shirt, and it was a Spanish piece of chain mail or iron mail that covered the chest and probably came down to his thighs. And he had worn this in battle, and it had protected him before from arrows. Well, Sleeping Bear sees this and takes that and shoots the arrow into Medicine Water's head and hits him in the cheek, and I think it goes through and maybe lodges in the jaw, and the result is that for the rest of his life, Medicine Water had a big scar on his face across his cheek. But he survives this injury. Medicine Water had taken his lance and was going to lance Sleeping Bear with it. But Sleeping Bear grabs that lance and jerks it out of his hands. And so this is how close they were. This was close combat. Well, when Medicine Water gets injured, other Cheyennes rush over, and they're going to protect Medicine Water, and they're going to kill Sleeping Bear. Well, one of them rides up there. Did I put his name up there? One of them rides up there with a lance, and Sleeping Bear grabs that lance away. So he's done this twice in this hand-to-hand combat. And then the Cheyennes retreat, or they withdraw across the creek and back to the Cheyenne battle lines. And we'll be talking more about Medicine Water. Next slide. Now, the Kiowas, as artists, have drawn a lot of this history. Now, Medicine Water turns over that iron shirt to his son, a lights-on Cloud, who dies in combat with the Pawnee in 1852. And the Kiowa draw it. And this is a lights-on Cloud that they are identifying as by the name of Iron Shirt. And that's what we find. It's not a mistake. He's known by both of those names. Now there's other drawings that show this guy, a lights-on Cloud, on horseback with that shirt as he's being killed by Pawnee. Next slide. Now, a lights-on Cloud had a brother whose name was Iron Shirt. It was a younger brother, a much, much younger. And Iron Shirt, that Iron Shirt, is buried right over here in Watonga, in the Watonga Indian Cemetery. And the guy in the red shirt there, John Sipes, is a descendant of Medicine Water. So both of these guys are descendants of one of the warriors from the Battle of Wolf Creek. And my point right here is people around this event, the Battle of Wolf Creek, their descendants are here today. They're right here in the nearby communities. There's and they're doing research. They're actively involved in researching Cheyenne history. This is not something that happened 200 years ago and has just gone away. It's still a very much a part of this Cheyenne culture today. Next slide. So, as I have said, the Kiowas have drawn these events. And I showed this one from the 1837. Well, they've also drawn Battle of Wolf Creek from 1838. Well, this time it's the Kiowa inside the breastworks. In one way that interpreters of this drawing believe that it represents the 1838 battle is the three lodges might represent the three tribes, the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache. And what you have here is arrows coming in and going out. And also this time, these lines represent bullets. And so now there's guns being used, not like the year before. Next slide. There's another drawing, and this is the best that I can get of it without trying to go and find it in person. But it's a large drawing with a whole bunch of stuff on it. And this is on the bottom. And this is as clear as I can make it. But there's three lodges right there. And there's arrows coming in. And I think there's arrows going out. So I think this represents 1838. And there's even a guy, a warrior on horseback, and I think this represents 1837, where you have arrows coming in. One of these days, I'm going to be able to view this thing in person and really find out the details. Next slide. Now, I'm not sure what to think about this one. It kind of looks like the breastworks with people inside it. You've got arrows coming in, and they've actually drawn guns. Okay? They've drawn guns. There's that squiggly line going in. Now, I don't see any arrows coming out. And so this would kind of be consistent with that 1838. But it could represent something else, such as Little Bighorn from 1876. And that could be Custer and his soldiers being wiped out. So, I don't know. But, again, it's fascinating to me that these drawings are out there and that we can tie some of them to events that happened right here. Next slide. Well, I've been talking about all of this Kiowa art. Is there Cheyenne ledger art that might connect to some of these people or events? Now, this drawing out of a Cheyenne ledger book called the Tie Creek Ledger is disputed. And some people believe that this drawing represents the arrow renewal, the Cheyenne renewal of the sacred medicine arrows. Well, there's others that disagree with that. I don't know. However, there is a portion of this up there, way up there. And you see that crescent that's pointed up. Next slide. Well, guess what? That is also a symbol that would have been on the arrow keeper. That's only one thing that might represent that. So this is questionable, but it could be a link between White Thunder, the arrow keeper, and depictions of the arrow renewal ceremony that were drawn maybe 50 years later, possibly. Okay, that's kind of a summary, or that's my story about White Thunder. Next slide. And that's the subject of the book that I wrote. That's the start. White Thunder, Children of White Thunder, talks about him and these things that I've been describing, and his descendants, right up to the modern day. And so I guess I've been talking for about 45 minutes, and I'll try to flip through this fairly quickly. Next slide. Essentially, the book talks about people, places, and events. And in very broad terms, very general terms, it goes from White Thunder, the Arrow Keeper, to his daughter, Owl Woman, to White Thunder's granddaughter, Julia Bent, who marries Edmund Guerrier, all the way down to my buddy, Harvey Pratt, who is a descendant of White Thunder. And he's the guy that started telling me some of these stories that caused me to just... I spent about 20 years researching, and then I started officially writing. Next slide. Places. Well, I just described to you Wolf Creek. Well, I found this map with George Bent's handwriting. And he actually marks the location where his grandmother, White Thunder's widow, where she died. It's hard to read, but it's my G-mother died. And he's marking the location right here along the Cimarron River. So, of course, this is not the only one in the book. We got people, we got places. Next slide. And we got events. We got lots of events. These descendants and White Thunder had something to do with all of these events up through 1878. Next slide. And I make the list down to 1918. But of course, like the title said, it actually goes through to 2020. But I want to draw your attention to this last item. And it's allotted land and transfer of native wealth. I think that's what that says. Native wealth to non-native wealth. Well, what does that mean? The land. By the 1890s, 1891 was the allotment period. And this was the end result to the Cheyennes and Arapahoes and the other Plains Indians. They're being allotted land. This is their land. Well, that's all they got. This is their wealth. Okay? So when I say the transfer of Indian wealth, native wealth, to non-native wealth, essentially that means to white people. Well, how did that happen? Well, I go into detail of how that happened. Next slide. And this is an example. It says right here, Julia Guerrier. Well, that's Julia Bent, who was a granddaughter of White Thunder. And her land has been put up for sale by the government representative, the superintendent of the Indian Agency. Look at that headline up there. Sale of non-competent and inherited Indian lands. And so this man, this government representative, has decided that Julia Bent, Julia Guerrier, granddaughter of White Thunder, is incompetent. She's non-competent and cannot conduct her own affairs. And her, along with hundreds of others, they're putting her land up for sale. Well, sale to who?
The white people.
However, next slide. I don't know how, but it didn't work. And up at least until 1967, her allotment still was in the hands of the Guerrier family. The last chapter of the book focuses on Julia and her granddaughter, Anne, and Anne's son, Harvey Pratt, who is a Cheyenne chief today. He was a long time agent at the OSBI, and he's also an internationally known artist. And it was determined that a memorial was going to be built in Washington, D.C. on the mall near the Smithsonian and the National Museum of the American Indian. And it's the National Native American Veterans Memorial. And essentially there was a contest, or artists were asked to submit a idea or plans for a monument. And out of all of them, Harvey's was chosen. And they built that monument. It took a while. COVID happened. But in 2020, the official opening took place. And it'll be there forever, or at least, for a couple of 100 years. And he's a descendant of White Thunder. Now get this. The daughter of White Thunder, Owl Woman, there's a mountain in Colorado that had a derogatory name since they named these mountains. It was known as Squaw Mountain. But a group of people came forward and they got that derogatory name replaced with the Cheyenne version of Owl Woman. And so about 200 years after her birth, White Thunder's daughter still has influence and is still significant today. Next slide. So, you need to get one of these. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
What's the price of your book?
The book sells for $30, and I brought a bunch of them, and the gift shop has them, and they will sell you one, and then you can come and probably back here at this table or somewhere, and I'll sign it for you. And if you already have one and you brought it with you, I'll sign it. Or yes.
I was wondering why were the Pawnee and Kiowa enemies with the Cheyenne and Arapaho? What was the conflict there?
Well, generally speaking, it was over territory.
Okay.
And you had the Great Plains in the migration of the buffalo. And everybody depended on the buffalo for their livelihood. And if they lived in the Rocky Mountains, they were going to come down to the plains on buffalo hunts. Or even if they lived in eastern Kansas, they were going to go on buffalo hunts. Or in Texas. So they were competing, or they were at odds with each other. And numerous reasons, but that's probably one of them.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
What was the age of White Thunder when he died?
70, 71. He was probably born around 1670, maybe a little before that. He was born in the 1600s. Yes.
Have you ever noticed there was a battle on Wolf Creek in Ellis County above Antelope Hills, in which there was the Comanches against the Texas Rangers? I think it was Texas Rangers.
Well,
And
I may not be familiar with that one, but there was a fight in that same time period with U.S. soldiers, U.S. dragoons out of Fort Gibson.
Yes. Well, the other thing is that fight, there was a Comanche chief who was called Iron Shirt.
I didn't know
And he
that.
had a breastplate of an old Spanish conquistador
Yeah.
breastplate. So I thought it was kind of interesting to
I
see
didn't
all the
know that. I'm glad
similarities.
you told me that.
Different groups, but similarities.
Yeah, yeah.
I asked one more. Was Al Woman kin to Black Kettle? Do you know? I've
Well-
read that she was a niece or something like that.
I don't think so.
Okay.
You may be thinking of George Bent's mother-in-law
Okay.
was believed to be a sister, maybe, of Black Kettle.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking of.
And her daughter married George Bent. And sometimes they would refer to his wife as a daughter or niece of Black Kettle.
Okay.
But that's kind of up in the air,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
But I don't recall off the top of my head, but everything that I possibly know about her and is in here. So I could look it up for you, but that's what all of these tabs are for, so that I can find stuff.
So Dee, you mentioned the ledger art depicting possibly the Battle of Wolf Creek, and you haven't got your hands on them. Where are they at?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I downloaded, and I think they're at not the Smithsonian, but well, it was the Bureau of Ethnology, which I guess that stuff is at the Smithsonian, or, yeah.
So none of that stuff is here in Oklahoma?
No. Well, there is some original ledger art, I believe, at OU, but I don't know for sure. And I think there's one at the Sam Noble Museum in Norman. And then there is original ledger art at the museum, the Gilcrease in Tulsa, that was drawn by Cheyennes working at Fort Reno and Fort Supply. But I don't think any of them depict Wolf Creek, or that I have looked at so far. But you know, I haven't seen everything. So I tell you, the history at Fort Reno is amazing. And you know, there was a wagon road from well, originally from Darlington, but from Fort Reno to Fort Supply. And it was essentially came alongside the North Canadian River. And I talk about that quite a bit in here and identify places. Because see, you can go to the 1874 survey maps, and it shows the dotted line and identifies it as the Fort Supply Trail.
Where can you find those kind of maps?
I found them online, but by accident, and I can give you the location, but
Oh, that'd be awesome.
what I was searching was the online records from the General Land Office from the Bureau of Land Management. And you can search a name, or if you have the ranged township section, you can search that. Well, when you find that allotment, if you dig around, but I can tell you exactly how to do it. You can pull up the 1874 map, the survey map, and there's no telling what you'll find on there. So,
Well, I've been trying to, my husband's grandmother was born in Elk, Oklahoma, not Elk City,
yeah.
but Elk, Oklahoma, and I have not been able to find a map that has elk on it.
My business cards are back there, and you can email me, and I can email you some of the website addresses where you can pull up some old maps
Awesome.
from the early 1900s. And this probably would have been during the settlement time period. They wouldn't have had, well, they didn't, until they did allotments in 1891, theoretically, there weren't white man towns in western Oklahoma. It was supposed to be Plains Indians reservations, but
Right,
I can help you with that.
thank you.
Yeah,
I understand that the people, the incidences, and the sacred arrows, all those stories kind of intertwine with each other. But does your book primarily follow generations, from kind of beginning to end, or do you also deal with what's happened to the sacred arrows in the time up until modern times?
as much as I possibly can, with as much detail as I can. However, the arrows are still here today. But we don't talk, or I'm not Cheyenne, but they don't want to talk about it because they don't want it to be general knowledge. And so a couple of chiefs are not bothered by what I have said or written about. But if I were to try to go into more detail, if I had it, then I would probably be crossing the line. But that's what my goal was, to tie together as much stuff as possible. So, again, for shipping purposes, this weighs 1 pound. So you're getting your money's worth for $30. It's 450 pages. There's 32 pages of footnotes, which people have said, you overdid it. That's too many, but not for me, not for a researcher. So,
Have the arrows ever been located?
I'm glad you asked that, because that was on one of the slides. And White Thunder went to the Pawnees and got 1 or 2 of those arrows. Well, their allies, the Sioux, had raided a Pawnee village and found another one. And they brought that back to White Thunder. So they had 2 or 3 of the originals. Well, they had the 4 new arrows, replacement arrows. So now they had 6 or 7, and they only needed 4. So they had to decide what to do. And they decided, and again, there's differing stories, but the prevailing story is they decided to keep the new ones because the others, the old ones, had been tainted because they had been handled by these other people. Yes.
Where were the arrows found?
Where?
Yes.
Well, when White Thunder went to that Pawnee Village in 1835, all 4 of them were on display there in that chief's lodge. And he agreed to give one of them back, or 2. Some stories say 2. But that's where all 4 of them were at that time. And then sometime later, the Sioux attacked a Pawnee village and recovered 1 arrow. So there's 1 or 2 arrows that never were, original arrows that were never recovered. And so at least 1 is out there somewhere. So, does that answer your
Where are the new
question?
ones at? Are they in Oklahoma or are they, we don't know that either.
Yeah, there's rumors, you know, but, yeah, they,
So do we know who the keeper of the arrows, who the descendant is now?
it is known. Yeah, I mean, it's not a big secret, but I don't think it's proper for me to talk about it. Within the Cheyenne tribe, there's 44 chiefs, and this is traditional, going back a long time. There were 10 bands within the tribe, and each one was represented by 4, and that's the Council of 44. And it's still in business today. And Harvey Pratt is one of those 44 current chiefs. Well, you also have the society bands, like the bowstrings. There's still a bowstring society that's active, and other bands. And each one of those bands has a head man. Sometimes they're referred to as a chief, but it's probably the more accurate term is a head man. And they have a role to play in tribal affairs. And in more modern times, the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes adopted a constitution similar to a state constitution. And so now they have a governor and a lieutenant governor and a legislature. But they still have the Council of 44. They have the society head men. There's an arrow keeper. So some of the old, some of the new. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Anybody else? Come on, you got me going now. Come on.
Do we know whether the arrows had metal arrowheads or flint?
Well, these arrows go back a long, long time, probably
Probably
before metal.
Yeah.
What they were in during White Thunder's time period, I don't know. But each one was different, painted differently, and represented different things.
Do you happen to know where George Ben's buried?
Yes, I do. Down here south of Weatherford is the town of Colony. And there's a cemetery southeast of there that George is buried in.
And he taught or worked in the Seegers
Yeah,
colony there.
yes, that's correct. And Julia and her husband Edmund are buried in the Gary Cemetery. And the town of Gary is named after Edmund Guerrier. It's an abbreviated version of Guerrier. One of the other brothers, Robert, had a ranch near Watonga. And it drives me crazy because I have never found out where he's buried. I know he died in 1889 of an illness, and George writes about that. But George didn't say where he's buried, and so I know there was a graveside service, and who the preacher was, I just don't know where. It just drives me crazy.
Have you ever talked to the gentleman in Colony who's quite a historian of that area?
No?
You might, I've got his name somewhere. I'll see if I can get it to you, because he knows a lot, at least locally.
Well, I do know a Cheyenne guy who's an artist, George Levi, and he knows that whole area around there. And I know a lady who grew up down there, and she's Caddo, but she married a Cheyenne, and she knows. So yeah, I just, I meet at events like this and others just out. I meet people and learn a lot of interesting stuff. And then I go around to different museums and libraries and places and digging around in files, and yeah. So did I answer your question, or did I just start rambling on and on? Well, I appreciate it. You can, I think maybe you can see how enthusiastic I am. And one more thing. 2023 finalist for 2023 Oklahoma Book of the Year. I didn't win Book of the Year, but I was a finalist for 2023. So. Anything else? Thank you very much.
All right, before I let you guys go, we do have some surveys. I don't know if everybody's aware. If you fill that out and take it to the back table and get a ticket, you'll be entered to win a coin, an Indian.
It's a 1935 Indian head nickel
Okay,
that has been accented in 24 karat gold.
there you go. There's 2 of them that we're going to be giving away, so we encourage you to do that. And then also, Dee's going to be doing a book signing, so he'll be in the gallery. You can purchase, like he said, the book through the gift shop, unless you already have it, and he said he'd sign it, so that's great. But we also have a little reception, some hors d'oeuvres, so I invite you to stay for that as well. So thank you so much.
Enjoy it.